History 1. When I was 18 and freshly graduated, I had a tough time trying to enroll in college and finding a job in my area. It led me to sign up at the job center. They decided I was too shy for interviews and placed me in a group meant to teach interview skills. Honestly, it felt like a complete waste of time. I think they just needed an extra person to make up the numbers. The other folks in the group didn't help much with my shyness either. They were all men at least 4 decades older than me and shared none of my interests. Unfortunately, I caught the attention of one member I wanted nothing to do with. I don't remember his name, but I'll call him Bill. Bill rubbed everyone the wrong way from the start. He interrupted the instructor to complain that being there was pointless since he'd be retiring soon, and no one wanted to hire someone who had spent over a decade in prison. He loudly told the man next to him that his prison sentence was for beating his ex-wife, but claimed she was lying, and he never touched her. This set me on edge immediately. I'm no legal expert, but I watch a lot of true crime channels, and I've never heard of a sentence of over 10 years for a single beating that supposedly didn't even happen. Bill was either lying and had severely beaten his wife, or he was covering up another crime. Either way, I wanted nothing to do with him. I avoided him as much as possible, just being polite when necessary. I didn't interact much with the other group members due to their ages. I attended the morning sessions, spent my lunch break at the library while the men went to the pub, and then headed home after the afternoon session. Nobody ever asked me about my breaks since the library and pub were in opposite directions and couldn't be seen from the front of the building. One day, about halfway through the course, I bumped into a friend during lunch and decided to catch up with them instead of heading to the library right away. I eventually made my way to the library and spent about 15 minutes there before going to check out my books. I ended up chatting with the librarian, who noticed I was checking out books related to a franchise he also liked. We were talking for about 15 minutes when I felt someone grab my shoulders. My friends and family know I hate being touched without warning, so I knew it was a stranger. I knocked their hands away and turned to see Bill standing there with a big smile. He made a joke about finding me and how I practically lived in the library. It was clear he hadn't just bumped into me by chance. He had been following me. Bill had been held back after the session for filling out his paperwork incorrectly, so there was no way he could have seen me go to the library. The only way he knew to look for me there was if he'd been watching me during previous breaks. This was extremely unsettling, especially since Bill had never shown any interest in me during the sessions. While Bill kept talking, the librarian leaned in and asked if I knew him. I briefly explained the situation, and the librarian politely asked Bill to leave me alone or leave the building. Bill refused, claiming we were friends, ignoring my protests. The librarian insisted, and Bill finally agreed to leave, though he stationed himself right outside the doors, waiting for me. The librarian was concerned and suggested I stay until his break so he could walk me to my bus stop, but I had another meeting later and couldn't wait. He asked me to let him know I was safe the next time I was there. Reluctantly, I left. Bill immediately invaded my personal space again, joking about the librarian's problem and acting like we were close. I tried to walk away, but he grabbed my arm and insisted we were taking the same bus. I told him I'd never seen him on my bus, but he corrected me, saying we both needed the same bus. Though tempted to walk to a different stop, I knew he'd follow. When I agreed to the closer bus stop, he let go of my arm and kept chattering like we were friends. When we reached the stop, he walked past it, but as soon as he realized I wasn't following, he came back, confused. Bill insisted I had agreed to get coffee with him, which I hadn't. He kept pushing, even inviting me to his flat, making bizarre claims about his daughter being naked on the couch. People at the stop were staring, and I used that moment to firmly tell him no. The bus arrived and I got on quickly, hoping to escape, but Bill followed and shoved me into the seat, pinning me against the window. I shouted for him to move and leave me alone, but he ignored me, continuing to try to convince me to go to his flat. Nobody intervened, though a few gave me uncomfortable looks. I spent the ride huddled against the window, trying not to touch him. He finally gave up but pointed out his apartment block, told me his number, and tried to kiss me goodbye. I dodged and got off the bus, shaking and seething. When I got home, I emailed the instructor, explaining what happened and asking to switch groups. She ignored it for a week until I threatened to involve the police. Their solution was to let me leave the course early, essentially kicking me out as if I was the problem. I bumped into Bill not long after, and he asked why I hadn't been attending. I managed to get away and lose him in the crowd. I've seen him a few times in passing since, but luckily he's never noticed me or approached me again. I hope it stays that way. History 2. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and a few years back I was driving home after dropping my uncle at the airport for a late-night flight. It was already dark when I left the airport, and I still had a long 3-hour drive ahead of me. A few hours into the drive, my GPS recalculated and directed me onto a winding back road. There were no other cars or streetlights, making it a pretty dark and eerie path. As I turned a sharp curve, a black car suddenly appeared out of nowhere and started tailgating me. Then I saw blue lights flashing. The road was so dark that I had to drive for a while to find a spot with even a few dim lights where I could safely pull over. The officer approached my window and asked if I knew that my tags were expired. I found it strange because I was driving my cousin's car, and she is usually very diligent about keeping things up to date. But it wasn't just that. The way he spoke made me uneasy. He was talking really fast, like he was in a big rush. Before he even got my license and registration, his radio beeped, and he told me he had to respond to another call. He practically ran back to his car and sped off. I continued my drive home, shaken and half thankful that I didn't get a ticket. I shrugged it off until the next day when I checked the car and saw that the tags were not due to expire for another 2 months. It might have been a simple mistake, but the whole encounter felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He might have misread the number, but looking back, I wonder what could have happened if he had bad intentions. Since that night, I make sure to only pull over in well-lit, populated areas. And if I can't find a safe spot, I call 911 to let them know what's happening. History 3. So I'm sure I'm going to sound crazy here, but I was really creeped out by a recent encounter at the grocery store. I was there with my little boy Billy, and this older lady, probably in her 70s, came up to me. She said, "Ma'am, just so you know, all the canned veggies are on sale for 50 cents this week," and went on about how it was a great deal that didn't come around often. I thanked her and said I'd grab some on my way out. As she started to walk away, she turned back, smiled at Billy, and asked how old he was. I told her he was just over a year. Then she asked if he was my only child and threw in a few other random questions about him. Suddenly she said, "Hey, I just remembered I have some clothes in my trunk, all boy stuff in the 2T to 3T range. Do you want them?" I politely declined, saying we'd be shopping for a while and I didn't want to hold her up. She replied, "Oh, it's no problem. I'll just wait outside and can come back in to find you before you leave. Are you a single mom? Do you need them?" At that moment, I got this gut feeling that something was off about her. I said, "Nope, not a single mom, and we have all the clothes we need, but thanks for the offer." She kept pushing, saying things like, "I just don't know what to do with them. If you could use them, I'd really be happy to give them to you." It felt like she was trying to lure me and Billy to her car. I kept declining and walked away. I continued shopping, making a few more laps around the store. At one point, I saw her standing in an aisle with a younger man, just people watching. Maybe I was being paranoid, and she was just a sweet old lady trying to be kind. But something inside me told me to get out of that conversation as quickly as possible. Parents will understand that having a small child with you often leads to strangers talking to you and making small talk about your cute kid. But this conversation didn't feel like the others IVDJTMV had while out and about with Billy. Has anyone else had a similar experience? History 4. This happened when I was just a kid, around 10 years old. I was at a ski resort with my dad, my stepmom, and my 3 sisters. My dad, stepmom, and 2 sisters were still out skiing, but my sister Ava and I got cold, so we decided to head back to the hotel to grab some food. We sat at the hotel restaurant until my stepmom came down. We asked her if she could hold our table while we ran up to the room to drop off our ski jackets. We took the elevator up, and as we stepped out, I heard someone behind us say, "Hey." Now keep in mind, we were both about 11 at the time, and I didn't think he was talking to us, so I ignored it. We walked into our room, but before we could close the door, the man stepped into the doorway. He was tall, probably around 6 feet, and looked pretty old, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s. He was wearing a hotel staff uniform, but it didn't have any logos on it. The thing that really set off alarm bells was that he was wearing black surgical gloves. He said, "Hey, I was talking to you." Caught off guard, Ava said, Us?" He replied, "Yeah, you guys. I was wondering if you could take a picture for me and come into my room to pour some water." Our parents always told us never to trust strangers, and we were already getting a bad vibe from him. We politely declined. His tone got a bit annoyed and he said, "Come on, it'll only take a second. Can you please just pour me some water in my room?" At this point, we knew something was really off. We said no again. The conversation went back and forth for about 3 minutes until he actually tried to walk into our room. Instincts kicked in, and I ran toward the door saying, "Sir, we're good," and then slammed the door on him. Ava and I sat in our hotel room for about 10 minutes, panicking about how we were going to get down to tell our parents since we'd left our phones downstairs. We looked out the peephole and saw that he was gone, so we bolted down the hallway and ran down the stairs to the restaurant. When we told our stepmom, she was mortified and immediately went to hotel security. They interviewed us and asked for his description because there weren't any cameras in the hallway. We gave them the description, and they told us that nobody matching it worked there. Most of the staff were young, broke college students. It was at that moment that it really hit us. If we had gone with that man, we might have been in serious danger. So please, everyone, teach your kids about stranger danger. And to the creepy hotel guy who didn't actually work there, I pray and hope we never encounter you again. History 5. This is a story about a guy I knew, someone I had to cut ties with because he turned out to be a real psycho. The first part will give some context as to why I distanced myself from him, and the second part explains why this story belongs in the "let's not meet" category. To keep things anonymous, I'll leave out ages and locations. It all started about 4 years ago when I was living at a buddy's house while attending a nearby university. It was me, my friend Tom, his sister Lily, and their parents. About 2 weeks into my stay, Lily invited her boyfriend Jack to move into the house. At first, Jack seemed like a cool guy, sociable and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks or had a smoke out in the garden talking about life. Within the first month, though, cracks started to show in Jack's behavior. He'd rant about government conspiracies, claim he was always wronged, and talk a lot about Sigma male nonsense and martial arts. Oh, and he had a terrible temper. He had this big dog that he always kept in a cage, and it was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog actually attacked Lily one time and had to be put down. That's when the guilt trips towards her began, and his ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, Jack decided to live in a shipping container because the parents wanted him out of the house. He dragged Lily along for the ride. They rented a container in a storage yard on the outskirts of town. Jack intimidated and threatened the staff there constantly until they called the police. This, of course, was another conspiracy in his eyes. He became increasingly abusive to Lily, to the point where her family got involved to get her out of there. I stayed close to them, pretending to be on his side until we could safely get her out. They eventually broke up, and Jack blamed me, claiming I was poisoning her against him. Lily moved on, found a new partner, and they're very happy now. We all blocked Jack on everything possible, but he continued to harass us until he eventually disappeared. Or so we thought. Fast forward to last year. I started receiving messages on social media from several different accounts, blocking each one in turn as I figured out they were from Jack. Some messages were friendly, some were hostile. One profile, however, pretended to be someone I knew from university. We talked about life, how things were going, and eventually this friend invited me to a house party, claiming it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked time off work, made travel plans, and kept talking to this friend as the date approached. I mentioned the party to Lily, and she was interested in going until I mentioned the address. She panicked. The address was a property belonging to Jack's father that was scheduled for sale. On the day of the party, I called the police, claiming I suspected a break-in at the property. They found 5 people there, including Jack. Parked out front was a butcher's van equipped for food storage and full of knives, hammers, and rope. Yeah, terrifying stuff. Please, everyone, be cautious about who you trust and always listen to your gut feelings. I'm thankful every day that I didn't end up at that party.